Hey guys, welcome back to Mentally a Badass. And hello, Nikki. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks so much, Justine. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, we're going to talk a lot about a lot of different things today, but the main topic is going to be being vulnerable and the ripple effect of being vulnerable because I'm actually really excited for this because this is something that's really important for the Mentally a Badass brand. So, in every episode, we like to go deep into your past so we can understand who you are and who you are today. So, first, I do know that you did break free from a toxic relationship and did lose your mother, but I kind of want to go a little bit more back. We like to talk about like childhood and childhood trauma. Is there like, that's my first question for you because you and I seem very similar and mental is so important to you. So I'm trying to see if there was anything in like your childhood that may have led you into becoming like a mental health advocate.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd say, I think the short answer is yes, but I would say that's sort of the case for all of us to some degree. And I'll explain that a little bit further. So I would say I had a really good childhood overall. I was in a home where I was very much loved and it was communicated to me that I was loved. I was supported. I had, a lot of privilege growing up as a white female in a suburb. And so it in sort of like the middle class, upper middle class. And so generally speaking, there wasn't this intense childhood trauma. But what I will say is that I also knew that I was gay probably around when I was 9, and I didn't come out until I was 19. And so there were things that happened, like losing a group of friends that I had in 7th grade because they thought I was a lesbian, and then losing one of my best friends in a car accident when I was 16. So it wasn't extremely young childhood, but I had two pretty significant incidents that really affected the way that I saw myself and the way that I saw the world. And so I think that was definitely a catalyst for me digging deeper into parts of myself as I got older. But the mental health side of it wasn't really something that I addressed until I was an adult and really emphasized going to therapy because I was unhappy with my work life, only to discover that, like, me not liking my job and feeling like I lacked purpose was just really the impetus to getting me to dig deeper on things that happened when I was younger and these other things that socially made me feel isolated or made me feel sort of desperate that brought me to a place where I ended up in a toxic relationship. So it really sort of came full circle. But it wasn't like I had this sort of tragic origin story. I had quite a good life growing up. But I think when you start to peel back the layers, it becomes more obvious where some of those patterns or toxic behaviors can start to develop and create more stress in other areas of your life as you get older.
Yeah, I like what you say how there was nothing like originated from childhood because I usually talk a lot about that in this podcast, but I like how you mentioned that there necessarily doesn't have to be something from your childhood for you to like get into like mental health advocacy and to really dig deeper. So it looks like when you were like I guess in like a teenager in high school, you had a couple of, incidents that may have had you think deeper, but I actually want to dig into your work life because it seems like your work life was like the turning point. So,
Yeah.
and I've experienced that too. So let's go a little more deeper into that. I want to learn.
Yeah. So, I mean, I graduated college in 2008. So it was the peak of the recession back then, the first go around for all the millennials out there who are like, isn't that happening again? And I had a film degree. So it was sort of like, what are you going to do with your life? I was lucky that I ended up being in a position where I had a career that led me into tech. So I had the opportunity to actually work my way, quote unquote, up the corporate ladder. It wasn't what I desired. I always swore I never wanted a desk job. I thought I was going to be a documentary filmmaker. I had this deep desire to help people share their stories. I think that definitely led me down the path to podcasting. But ultimately, what ended up happening was I climbed this corporate ladder. And because I started off at the peak of the recession in my career, I was making virtually no money. I'm basically minimum wage. And so the only way that I could continue to enhance my career and my salary was to kind of jump from job to job every couple of years. And I did quite well for myself. I ended up working at Amazon and AWS. And as much as that's like a nice little resume builder, it was toxic as anything. And I was unsatisfied. I felt really just disconnected from any sense of purpose. So basically, like I kind of job hopped for a while trying to find the right, not just like salary. I mean, that was definitely a piece of it. I wanted to be able to make a better living, which I was able to do, but it came sort of at the cost of compromising my well-being in a lot of ways. And I just wasn't happy. So I was a product manager for software, and I was really lucky because I loved the people I worked with in a lot of cases. And I think if you can develop good relationships at work, even if the work kind of sucks, you're like, it's okay. At least I like people here and I feel somewhat good about my life day to day. But I had gotten to a point where it just wasn't cutting it. And I couldn't find anything to really like muster up me giving 100%. I could feel myself lagging. I could tell that I was lagging to the people around me. And so I sort of wasn't even meeting my own standard of quality anymore. And because of that, I basically ended up going to therapy being like, I'm lacking a sense of purpose. I need to figure out what it is that I'm supposed to do and why I'm struggling so much. And so in that way, I was really like, okay, I want to dig into why I feel so unfulfilled. And ultimately, when you have a good therapist, at least in my experience, they ask sort of those questions about when you were younger and sort of how your life developed. And at first I was pretty resistant to it. I was like, no, I had a good life. Like my parents raised me well, I respect them. And, yeah, we had our moments, but it's still like, I'd say generally speaking, I'm happy with how I grew up. I'm happy with how I was treated. Again, generally speaking, I think that there are things that my parents could have done better. And that stuff started to come up in therapy where it was like, oh, maybe like they did the best they could, but that still wasn't what I needed. And maybe because I didn't always feel super safe to communicate things to them, that as much as they were like, you can tell us anything, I didn't feel that way. So then I'm holding on to things like I hadn't come out to them, or different things that were going on in my life, like with my toxic ex. Like I just was very reserved in what I could share with them. And so I started to really understand more sort of where I'm a really open person. And I would have said like, oh, I'm super emotionally available. But I wasn't actually like allowing myself to feel those emotions. I became very aware of the fact that I was intellectualizing them. So identifying them and being like, this is how I feel. And rationally, I understand that. And then my therapist sort of poking and being like, yeah, but what's that about? What is it that's telling you? And so I started to gain a much better sense of who I was more holistically, because I went in trying to understand why am I unfulfilled with this work that I'm doing. So that's sort of like that was the thing that sort of catapulted me into paying more attention to my mental health. And in those moments, I was really starting to peel back the layers on the toxicity that was happening in the relationship that I had, which I can go into more, but it started to just really shed light on these areas of my life where I was sort of, I think, seemingly satisfied, but really just covering up a lot of things that didn't make me happy and trying to justify it to myself.
Yeah. So, one thing that I want to mention that you said is that even though your childhood, you were, happy with your childhood, there were some moments where you felt that you were, I guess, little nervous to open up about certain things, but like subconsciously, you're not really like consciously, you're not really realizing it. And so that kind of got me thinking is they say that even though you may not have had trauma in the household, people could have had trauma that was from society.
Yeah. Yeah.
You kind of get what I'm saying here? So it's like your parents didn't traumatize you. Of course, parents aren't like perfect. That
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
definitely like understandable. Like I would never expect any parent to just be perfect. They all have their bad days. Like it happens.
They're all human too,
Um
right? Like that's the thing, is when you're a kid, like the hardest thing, and sorry for interjecting, but I feel like it's important to note this, is that one of the things I found really interesting was learning about our relationship with our parents. And as a child, a lot of what we'll do is internalize our anxiety when they can't meet our needs, because it's safer for us to sort of blame ourselves than to put the ownership on our parents, because we fundamentally, as a child, again, to your point, subconsciously understand this person needs to keep me safe. This person needs to protect me. And so if I perceive that they're not protecting me, that now I'm unsafe. So rather than seeing
Mhm.
them as unsafe, we internalize the anxiety and face that inward, and it creates more stress on us as the child. So I think there were moments where that happened. Again, not to some extremely severe degree, but my parents are baby boomers, and they didn't have the emotional awareness or emotional intelligence to access the things that they needed to make sure that didn't
Mhm.
happen, you know?
Yeah, yeah, it totally makes sense. And I like my parents are baby boomers too. And it's just it came from like, their generation where mental health wasn't spoken about. Like my mom even told me that they would say things like you are unseen and unheard. Like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
apparently
Children are
people would
better
say
seen
that.
and not heard. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is, right? And then when she tells me that, I'm like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Especially in this like day and age in this world. It's like, I mean, there's still people out there who are still thinking the same way,
Totally.
but mostly like especially with the internet, more people are talking, and that's what we're gonna get in later about like the whole like ripple effect and such. And that's why, you know, that's the one good side of the internet is that we have like the opportunity to meet people that you never really thought you would meet. Like I don't know
Yeah.
if you ever experienced this, but like in school, have you ever kind of felt like you couldn't really fit in with anybody and you kind of felt like the odd one out? And yeah,
For
yeah, so
most of
like
my
you're in like
life.
your little home. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like you're in like your little hometown, you just think your hometown is how the rest of the world is. Isn't that crazy? Like
Yeah.
that's what you
Yeah.
think as a child. Another thing I want to like kind of jump back in with the whole child thing is that I do always like what like talking about is that a lot of parents, especially like I guess in that day and age, or even like the generation like before that or whatever, like an older generation is they don't like understand that certain things that they do, like if they have to, let's say, work like I don't know 60 hours a week or whatever, right? Like which I understand, if you have to survive, you have to survive. Obviously
Yep.
we don't
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
choice,
Totally.
right? But there's also like I personally know people that work that much, but they also live above their means.
Right. Yeah.
So I think in their head, they work all this to make all this money to give their kids like this like lavish life, but they don't understand that like when you're out and working these hours and not home with them, they're thinking that they're not worthy of your time.
Yeah.
They're thinking that like you're abandoning me. Like what's wrong with me? So I think that you kind of brought that up, and I just feel like you're internalizing that. So I think that was something really important to, bring up on here in this episode is like, if there's any like parent listening or just like anyone really, just like a some knowledge there to know that, I mean, I'm sure it's spoken about on Instagram and such. Like I always look at these videos, but yeah, no, I feel like a lot of people don't understand like how important it is to have connections with other human beings, have that time to spend with people. And like money should just really be seen as a tool for a happy life,
Yeah.
like to pay, make sure you're comfortable and have all your needs met. Like you don't need to like go out and like buy a, I don't know, like a $5,000 tour or this or
Well,
that. I mean, it's all about
I
how you use your money, of course, but yeah,
I
I mean,
think
I
a
think
lot
a
of
lot.
sorry, I was just gonna say, I feel like a lot of people try to try to fill the void with the
Yeah,
stuff instead of addressing the things that are really problematic. So you had actually,
yeah.
okay, so what you had said was sort of, if it's not necessarily from like your home life, is there something societally that impacts sort of the way that you're showing up in the world and how that affects you? And I mean,
Yes.
I would say yes, because I mean, I was born in 85, and so like the early 2000s, people weren't, I mean, it's hard to say now because so much has sort of regressed, and it feels like there is a lot of hate and fear surrounding the queer community. But I'll
Mhm.
speak to the fact that it didn't even feel like okay to be open about it back then in a different way than it does now. I feel like we got to a place where people were okay with it, and now people are pulling back on it and fear mongering around it. So
Yeah.
keeping in mind that it was like growing up, there was a gay straight alliance in my school, but like you weren't going to join that. That would have been just socially catastrophic because people would have started making assumptions about you. And so I always had a boyfriend. I really love connecting with people. So I think I was able to sort of justify that to myself, that I had these connections and I like the relationships. And maybe at the time I might have seen myself more as bisexual because I was masking that way. But I think when I really got to the root of all of it, it was like I felt this pressure to be something that I wasn't, not just in my sexuality, but like the way that I dressed, my sort of overall look. I tried to appear more feminine because I thought that that's what I needed to do. And so I didn't want to be misgendered because that happened when I was a kid, when I had short hair. So like I do think there's sort of all these cumulative factors that come into play environmentally and then socially that ultimately construct this view of ourselves in the world that maybe we don't fully understand until we get into it and we start doing that deep work that you're talking about and being in
Mhm.
therapy and having an objective party ask questions that you don't even think to consider. Because there have been so many times where my therapist will say something and I'm like, yeah, actually, I think the best moments in therapy for me, and I'm curious, given that this is a mental health podcast, is it safe to say that you've done therapy? You've been to therapy?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, since I was like
Okay, I'm
15.
like, I'm like, okay, I'm like, I'm assuming this, right? Obviously, that seems given the nature of the show. So for me, one of the biggest things that I try to tell people who feel hesitant to go to therapy is they're not going to, if they're a qualified, good therapist, they're not going to make you feel bad about the things that you're sharing. And they're also not going to force you to think something or try to tell you how to live your life. If anything, they're going to give you the resources and tools you need to identify the things within yourself. And you're going to have the aha moments and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, you know what? Yeah, I actually really understand that about myself. Or, huh, I hadn't really thought of it that way. Right. They're
Yeah.
spurring these really important moments within yourself. They're not dictating to you what it is that you should do or how you should do it. They're advising you or they're holding space for you so that you can come to those things within your own time and with the context that you have that they might not yet have also, because you're kind of slow drip feeding a therapist the information you want to share with them. That was like
Mhm.
a weird, like milking a cow sort of movement I made with my hands. Things are just weird today. And so I'm going to put these down. And I feel like for me, the really important thing when it came to therapy and getting into where I developed these toxic traits within myself and allowed these patterns to persist in my life was acknowledging ultimately that I completely lacked a sense of self-love, did not like myself, but I didn't know that I didn't like myself. It was like
Mhm.
I sort of to an outside person might appear as if I do, but there was this very subtle self-loathing that existed throughout my whole life because I never felt like I belonged, which is what you tapped into when you asked that question about growing up and feeling like you didn't fit in somewhere. It was I had friends, but I never felt fully like I could be myself. Like I wasn't fully out. I wasn't open with my family about a lot of things, So when you start to internalize all of that stuff, it's hard to have a strong sense of self-love because you haven't even fully expressed who you are.
Yeah. And another thing too is what they say is a lot of people don't think about this, but your subconscious picks up information that's going on around you when you don't even realize it, right? So even if you don't directly get affected by something, so let's say that you see like I don't know, like a friend or just someone who is getting bullied or whatever. And then so you watch someone who came out, let's say, gay, and then they're getting bullied, right? But you're still not out yet. You may think that makes you scared, that makes you fear, and that kind of in a way, even though it's not directly to you, in a way it does traumatize you in the back, and that would make you feel like you just can't come out. So I think that's like one thing I wanted to bring up that people may not realize is that I think it's so important for not just like us to work on on ourselves, but well, first I believe that the first thing you should do is work on yourself, because if it's a mess inside, it's going to be a mess outside as well.
Oh,
So
yeah,
like that's one thing yeah, yeah, exactly. So but once you're like worked on inside and you're like starting to like, heal and such, then you can be your best self and help other people, right? Like
totally.
before I started this podcast, I was a freaking mess. I didn't know, like, you don't start out knowing all this information, right? Like you're not like born. Like me being on this podcast is like literally like in the making. Like I didn't do mental health. I mean, I did go to school for psychology, so I do have like a educational background. But I think the experience and then learning from other people is way more powerful. Which is
Totally.
a great thing about this podcast is that like I interview people with so many different like perspectives, walks of life, knowledge, and like that's like the most powerful thing. So I think what I was trying to get is like if if we're kinder to other people and we're just loving as in the society and we spread love and not hate, then I just feel like people like are like children can grow up feeling, not feel like they're not like lovable
Yeah.
or not have like self-worth and such. Because if you ask anybody, like in our generation, I mean, I think you and I were like 10 years apart. I was born in 95. But we're
Yeah,
still
yeah.
like you're probably the beginning of the millennial. I'm like towards the end of the millennial.
Yep, yep.
But yeah,
I'm
but
I'm
our,
like squeaking by there.
yeah, yeah. So, which is I love talking to you because it's also just like seeing how it was then and now. Okay,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
think we could, yeah. But I think we both knew about MySpace
Yeah.
and the
Yes.
HTML, and I think yeah, we can relate to that. So in that time, but yeah, I mean, you could agree that growing up is definitely not at all how it is today.
Yeah. And I
So
think
it's
one
just like
Oh, I'm sorry. You can finish your thought. Sorry about that.
I think what I was trying to say is that I really hope that what we're doing, like with your podcast, which we'll talk about, and my podcast, and just the internet and spreading this knowledge and love, is that I'm hoping that the next generation can, it can be different. They can feel love. They don't have to feel what we felt as
Yeah.
children, even if we didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
You know
Well,
what I
and I
mean?
think
So,
yeah, I think you raised a really good point too. I love the if you're a mess on the inside, it's going to be a mess on the outside. It's sort of this analogy that I give where I've talked about how if you keep sort of shoving stuff that you don't want to deal with under the bed, like there's only so much that you can do with that until it creeps out and it pours. It's like you can't hide it anymore, right? So
mhm,
I share that sentiment, and I think you raise a really good point around the way that younger people the way that we can help younger people evolve hopefully more quickly into a place of self-love and vulnerability and validation of those feelings, because something that wasn't easy being an elder millennial is that there was so much comparison when I was growing up, where it was like you needed to look like this or you needed to have this or be that way. And not that that doesn't still exist. I understand influencer sort of um economy creates this perception as well, but body positivity is something that is very different than when I was growing up. It was like you were rail
mhm,
thin and that was the standard. That was what people wanted, right? And so if you were anything above rail thin, you're probably dealing with honestly body dysmorphia now, like myself, my wife, and other people in our lives, even if you have a perfectly healthy looking body, because these things sort of get ingrained in you. And when you speak about being in environments where you might witness other people being ostracized or harmed in some way because of who they are or how they are, yeah, it absolutely holds you back from being your authentic self. I mean, when you said that, I thought about the comment I made about the Gay Straight Alliance and thinking about the couple of people that were in that and being like, I
mhm.
would never make myself that prone to being sort of alienated socially. And one of the things that I found really compelling in conversations with my therapist was the fact that she basically said, in your, sort of preteen, early teen years, the need for belonging psychologically is the greatest it will be in our lives. So when we feel like we are getting kicked out of a social group at this extremely important time in our lives, that is going to have a resounding effect on your self-worth moving forward. So yeah, it makes total sense that I chose to be in a relationship with somebody who challenged that part of myself, that inadequacy, who was able to feed on that to fulfill like their needs, while I desperately clung to them, hoping to be worthy enough and trying to validate myself through their eyes rather than validate myself for myself to know and trust and love who I am. Be able to determine that this wouldn't be a healthy relationship and become this version of myself that actually has enough respect to leave and go and be somewhere where it is a much healthier dynamic, which thankfully I ended up doing. But that was many years of therapy and a lot of very deeply traumatic events that occurred in the in between there that led me to a place of really, quite honestly, being forced to recognize it, because it was like, if I don't do that, then my life is going to continue to be much harder than I want it to be and much more painful than I want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, how long were you in a relationship with your toxic ex?
I would say over 10 years. So we met when I was
Okay.
20 and she was 31. And I would say, like, I can't make a diagnosis, but based on many conversations I've had and my awareness of narcissists, I would say absolutely a covert narcissist, potentially sociopathic. And also, she was dealing with substance abuse issues that she was hiding, stealing money, like basically putting herself in really dangerous situations that put me in dangerous situations. And like I said, I grew up in like the suburbs. I was a pretty, like, I just, I was naive. I didn't know what I didn't know, and that was very much taken advantage of as well. So it was a lot of
Yeah.
unpacking like my own cognitive dissonance to be able to pull myself out of that situation, because I didn't want to believe that what I was witnessing was actually what I was witnessing. She played the card that she had had a lot of deep trauma, which I believe to some extent is true, but it became all about how that was what the problem was. Like, I'm noticing that she's high, but she's telling me she's dissociating. We have a couples therapist that is validating her experience and sort of minimizing mine. And so there were a lot of things that really made it challenging, because I would be like one foot out the door trying to leave and then getting pulled back in with a lot of pretty standard, in retrospect, manipulation tactics to make sure that I was confused, dysregulated, and unable. I mean, I say unable with air quotes a little bit because I could have left, but when the psychological abuse is that strong, it's very difficult to leave. And statistically, it takes an average of 7 times for somebody to leave an abuser. So there's that factor as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I asked like how long you're in that relationship for, like how, because obviously the longer you are in that relationship, the harder it is to actually leave.
Yeah.
So my follow-up question for you is, when you did decide to leave, how did that play out?
Well, so this is funny because this is one of those stories. It's many stories baked into one. So the Cliff's Notes version, I think, is this the first time I think I'm telling this and I'm actually realizing like I might be feeling it while I'm telling it. Usually I'm very objective about it and I just sort of give the facts of the matter. Gosh, no, it was 2024. So almost 4 years ago now. Probably actually this time in 2020, November, there were a lot of things unfolding. There'd been like these drips and drabs of really, that's understating it. There'd been repeated traumatic events that were happening with my ex. Car accident after car accident, totaling my cars, a DUI that she had gotten into, uh, but claiming that it was because she'd taken her Xanax. Like, there was just like all these things that were sort of keeping things very confused. And I basically, there's some additional context that I don't know is necessary to share for the purposes of this conversation, but there was like one incredibly traumatic event that happened in March of 2019, and that sort of kept me on the hook, being vulnerable, trying to kind of be protective and making sure that she was okay, leaning into her trauma and her experiences. Then there were these repeated events that like just didn't make sense. Lots of obvious gaslighting in retrospect, and at the time, I was trying to call it out as gaslighting, but then what a narcissist does is just turn it back on you and tells you you're crazy, right? So I tried to sort of just work through that. And there were then a series of events where like my car was allegedly stolen, she was allegedly abducted, like all of these things were happening, and it was just becoming more and more obvious to me that like that wasn't the case. And then she got in another car accident. This is the third accident where my car was almost totaled. 2 times before that it was. Or sorry, it was totaled 3 times, and this would have been the fourth. And because my car kept getting totaled by her driving it and not having justifiable reasons, I put a dash cam in my car because I was like, what the fuck's going on? If what you're saying is true, then like we have no problem having a dash cam in the car. Well, I end up finding out that she's taken my car to go to a homeless encampment to get drugs. And so I can't see inside of the car, but I can hear the audio and I can see where it's facing and I can kind of see what's happening. And this is after the car accident. And I'm looking at this footage and I hear her and this person in the car talking about how she's literally doing heroin in my car as a cop car is driving by it. And I confront her about this and she's telling me like she doesn't even remember it. She doesn't even know. Like this was all, she's dissociating, all these things, right? Okay. Tells me this is the first time she's ever done heroin. I have a good friend whose sister dealt with a heroin addiction for a very long time. And she was telling me, she's like, there's no way this is the first time based on the withdrawal she's going through, Nikki. And I was just like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And I'm trying to honestly, I was just trying to get through those moments because it was really hard to understand like what I was witnessing. And it was very intense. And then I got to the point where I was just like trying to do my taxes and realizing that all this money I had given her for quote doctor's appointments that she had told me, I go and look in our joint bank account and I see that the account we had at the time, you could still see ultimately what the transactions were, but you could also rename them. Like, so you have like the origin transaction. So you can be like, this was the doctor's appointment or an ATM withdrawal or whatever it is. But if you wanted to rename it to be like, specifically, it was this, you could. And so I went in and realized all this money I thought you were spending on doctor's appointments, now that I'm digging deeper, you've been spending on cash withdrawals. So like, okay, it was just like slap in the face. You've been being lied to. All of this is bullshit. Like you have to get out of here. And so I basically was like, I'm leaving. Like I'm done here. I got a flight back to the East Coast to stay with my family. And I stayed with my sister for a couple months. This was in January 2021. And so still like peak COVID, vaccines weren't totally out yet. And I basically went to my sister's. Things kept happening with my ex. She tried to sort of justify it. I said, I want a divorce. Like, I don't want to be doing this anymore. It's too much for me. And then I got reeled by her parents for saying she needed to get her own health insurance. She needed to do things for herself. Like I'd been supporting us for ages by now. And basically just sort of getting torn apart by her and her family and the couple's therapist, basically saying that I'm the one in the wrong here, despite all the things that had happened to me in the context of all these traumas that were unfolding. And I'm very much summarizing for the sake of brevity here, but basically getting to the point where I was like, the safest place for me to be is with my family. They were able to really being away from her and then being with my family and then friends who I trusted, who were out of the situation, who knew me before I moved out to Seattle. Because in Seattle, it was all people who only knew me in the context of that relationship also, which I think made a really big difference. I needed people who kind of knew me before my ex also to witness what was going on. And so I finally got to a place where I was like, I have to tell my parents what's happening. I have to tell my sister. I have to explain what's going on because I really need to be able to leave this situation. Thankfully, I had my own therapist during all of this too. So like that was really important. And ultimately where I landed was like, I'm getting the divorce. And so between January and February, when I ended up, my mom ended up passing away February 21st, 2021, very suddenly. It was the day after hers and my dad's anniversary and my niece's third birthday. It was just tragic and unexpected. And so I foolishly called my ex and was like, I want you to be here. I want you to be able to be here to support me. Like I need that right now. Nobody in my family was happy about this. My friends were like, what are you doing? But it was like, no, I want she can show up for me at least in this. Right. And she did show up. physically, but she was disastrous with my family, manipulative continuously the whole time, and I regret it. I actually had my sister. I said I wanted her listed in the obituary as my spouse originally, and then I made my sister call the funeral home and get her taken out because I was like, fuck that. Like, sorry, I'm just like, I can't. What was I thinking? And it just became more and more disastrous, as I keep using that term. But then basically I spent a bit more time with my family. And when I ended up coming back, it ended up being the beginning of April that year. My ex basically I said, you need to be ready to leave. I need you to be ready to leave. I need you to have a plan in place. Like, we're done when I get back. At first I thought maybe I'd want some support, but I don't. Like, you need to go. Like, this isn't right for us. And I flat out said, like, I want a divorce. We're in person finally. I'm saying this to you, not over the phone. Like, this is what I want. This is to be expected. And she basically was like, no, like, you don't want to take a break? And I was like, we've been on a break. Like, I don't know what you think this is, but this is over. And so then I went to like a lake nearby just to kind of process and deal with everything. And then I come back to the house and her phone's out on the counter and she was in the shower. And so I'm looking at the phone, seeing that she's given our address to somebody who it's an unknown number. And I'm like, okay, this seems shady. So I grabbed the phone. I paid for the phone, all of it. So ultimately doesn't matter, but I'm making the point that I was sort of like, I've been lied to. I've been gaslit. Like, I have a right to know who has my home address now. And she chased me. She ran out of the shower to chase me down a flight of steps outside, tackled me to the ground to get her phone, like threw me into a fence basically, and had me pinned to the ground, lying, telling me that this is a lawyer, even though the person who's texting is clearly not educated as a lawyer. And I'm saying, like, I understand that this is somebody that's like either you're involved with for drugs as a dealer or a friend or whatever, but like clearly. And at this point, she's basically got me pinned to the ground by my neck and I'm holding onto the phone. And at this point, I know that I've said this in therapy that I think I was so tired of being gaslit that I was actually incapable of letting go of it. I was like, I will not continue to be lied to until she bit me twice. Once above my leg and then once really aggressively
Bit
on.
you?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
let me
It
sure,
was,
make sure I heard that correctly.
yeah. Yes. It was very savage. And what's
Literally.
crazy, yeah, sincerely. And it was scary in the sense of looking back on it. But in the moment, I don't think I had the capacity to understand. But it was dark out and my head was near a bunch of rocks. Like, this could have, I said to my dad, this easily could have turned into like a true crime documentary that I would have been devastated to like have to know that that could have happened. But it was really violent. And she basically grabbed the phone, ran back inside, called somebody and told them that I assaulted her. And so I basically say, you've got to get out of the house. I'm calling the cops. She's saying, I can't believe you do this. You're so abusive, all these things. And I'm like, you need to leave. I'm not doing this. And I called one of my friends to come be with me. And I said, I'm going to call the cops. She said, no, you're not. And I was like, all right. So I get on the phone to call the cops. And she's like, fine, I'll leave. Ends up leaving. But then I called the cops the next day and she ended up they ended up finding her, having to go to jail, which she was like, I can't believe you'd call the cops on me. I didn't think I would call the cops on her because I didn't think I'd be in a position where I would have to. But as someone who I was on the board of a nonprofit for survivors of domestic violence because my ex had told me that she had been a victim of domestic violence. So like everything that I know that I learned being a victim of domestic violence, not even understanding that I was because of all the psychological abuse. And then ultimately the physical abuse coming to a head, being like, I have a right for myself and for other survivors to call the police and make sure that this person who is clearly dangerous is not out there hurting other people. And so that was really how it all came together and sort of ended. I ended up having to get a restraining order. This was less than 24 hours after I got back after losing my mom and being in my home for the first time since then. So it was unbelievably explosive in terms of the way that my life sort of shattered. And I was, as I said many times to many people, I feel like I was given just a violent shove into the present moment and being like, what are you doing with your life? I realized that was like a very long story, and I'm saying it's the summary of it, but it's sort of the best way that I can condense it because to really explain the complexity of the situation, it was deeply psychologically abusive. It ended up being extremely physically violent. And then she basically got half, more than half, in the divorce because of the laws in my state. None of it mattered. None of that mattered. Her history of drug abuse didn't matter. Her history of physical abuse didn't matter. And basically, when the state pressed charges for the domestic violence, she just had been lying about everything. And so I had to decide, is it worth my time to try to fight this in a civil case when I've just lost my mom and we haven't even had a chance to grieve because this person's making it so complicated? And so I just sort of was like, the best thing I can do is free myself entirely from this situation rather than trying to go down swinging with somebody who's never going to be accountable to the things that they've done. And that really was, for me, I think, the lowest low, and also in some ways a really significant high for me in terms of like choosing myself and knowing that if I wanted to live a better, healthier life, I needed to completely remove that situation and that person from my environment and really prioritize my well-being. And at that point I was doing therapy like twice a week to swing it back into the mental health side of things, because it was like, what do you do? I don't know. My mom died. My spouse at the time was insanely violent towards me and could have killed me. Like, well, how do you come back from that? And I think the answer is you absolutely should be in therapy, and you should also be doing work outside of therapy to figure out what it feels like to heal within yourself.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, first off, that's everything that you went through, the whole story. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that. It's like, it's really also like sad to see like how bad someone's mental health can get, that they're ending up like to the point where they're like hurting you and like could have potentially have killed you. So that's that's crazy. But what I want to say is I'm glad that you, coming out of the situation, that you made a choice to go to therapy and to work through all of the trauma that you went through, then taking a different route, which I like speaking about how you can take two roads. And it's good that you went the right road where it's like nice and healthy and you're doing amazing things till today versus like
Well, I
doing
witnessed
like, I
it.
don't know, like
I witnessed it with my ex. Like, she took her trauma and she perpetuated her victimhood. And that's not to victim blame or shame, like, to be very clear. But when you watch
Mhm.
somebody basically blame the world for everything after they've been through something instead of trying to heal, it's really hard to watch, and it's destructive
Yeah.
to the people around them. And it was very obvious to me that I wasn't going to let that happen because I was actually learning a lot about trauma trying to help her. So it incidentally like really queued me up to be prepared for my own healing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And yeah, no, I can't really like, I personally just hate seeing people blame the world because at the end of the day, you can't, when you blame the world, you're just going to get worse and more miserable yourself because you can't control what goes out in the world. Like if, I don't know, someone is mean to you or hurts you or upset with you, or like, I don't know, your car gets totaled by, like just stuff that just happens, is like if you're just going to just hate on the world and just blame the world for everything, like blame the world for everything that's happening to you, it's like you're just asking to be miserable for the rest of your life. But
Yeah.
once you take yourself out of victimhood and realize like, let me take the time from having all this energy of hating the world and just spreading that hate and actually like doing things to work on myself to be an amazing person. Like it's kind of like I'm trying to think of the right word because I've done so much like healing myself and I'm just like such a naturally happier person. And but I remember like being that person that hates everything in the world. I mean, sometimes that does happen where I'm just like I get so angry like easily, but I mean, also it's just kind of giving myself grace, like realize I'm human and it's like even though I've worked a lot, there's gonna be some times where I'm just gonna be like, my kind of like my old self's gonna come out for like a
Yeah,
second.
for sure.
But it's really
Yeah.
like what people have told me is that it's more like not much of your old self, but more of your inner child that is screaming.
Yeah.
And I learned that from like I don't know who I learned that it was from one of my guests. We're talking about inner child and such, and I get very angry about if people don't have justice.
Yeah.
And my mom always say like, "Oh, your name's Justine because you're so big on justice." And people are like, "Oh, you should be a lawyer." I'm like, "Absolutely not," because the way that the system is, it's like I don't agree with half the stuff, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
cannot like, yeah, I like if someone's guilty, I cannot. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, I feel
I
you.
cannot do that. Yeah,
And I
I
think
can never
witnessing
be a
first
lawyer.
and I think witnessing firsthand how broken the justice system is to be in a position where an abuser gets an abusive person who has substance abuse issues gets a ton of
Mhm.
money after they've stolen a ton
Yeah,
of money. It's just like, what? That makes no sense to me. But I do think
cannot.
something that you said too that I think is really important about like that choice of sort of remaining in the victimhood versus healing is that I think part of what people struggle with, at least what I witnessed, is when you lack a support system. Like, so my
Mm,
family and friends were really there for me. My podcast lifted me out of this dark place. In fact, having conversations with people, as you described, from all walks of life and hearing their stories of resilience, like that inadvertently really showed me what was possible and strengthened me sort of subliminally to be able to recognize my own worth and to grow from that. But my ex had nobody, and I was constantly like, "You need a support system. You need people." Like her parents weren't really there for her. They perpetuated the problem. Her mom is like the original narcissist. So, like
yeah.
you can't expect somebody who has no support to be able to heal either. So there is the initial responsibility of an individual to say, "I want to heal, and I'm actively choosing that." But it was like and you can't make somebody do work that they're not going to do, but there is also an element of community that I think is very essential that not everybody has. And so when you think about, what can we do to help people become more loving, become more compassionate as a generation, I think it really does come down to, understanding the importance of empathy and hearing people's stories, even if it's unlike yours, because you and I think, have both clearly learned a lot from the shows that we've done and whatever situations we've had in our day to day lives, where you're sitting down and you're listening to somebody, not with the intention of responding, not with the intention of making your point, but just with the intention of listening to understand. And if we can teach people, whether they're a younger generation, our age, or older, right, how important it is to listen and try to have empathy, even if we don't agree, even if we're frustrated. Because listen, right now, I get it. Like, I'm pissed about a lot of stuff that's happening in the world. It feels extremely unfair. It is unfair. And at the same time, if I only allow myself to sink into the depth of that, then I'm going to fail to execute on sharing more love and compassion and empathy to people. So, I think it's important to be aware and understand where those gaps are and be able to acknowledge, if you're sinking into something, who can be around you to help pull you out if you can't do it on your own.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with the support system, and I think I had it on here that I want to talk about that. Because I feel like I think of like my life right now and like currently what I like mental health wise, like I have like a lot of childhood trauma. I have like a pretty much like a whole like list of all the ABCs like that have like BPD, ADHD, bipolar. Like I have a lot going on.
Yeah.
So my brain is kind of just like I also have CPTSD apparently is what I've learned like last year. And so I have moments of PTSD with certain things. So I have like I'm like every time I get something different, I'm just like I just have the whole alphabet at this point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
my point, yeah, exactly. And then my point is like, I felt isolated and alone when I was in high school, and that's when I was doing like a lot of self harm. But I think that, once I graduated high school and then I went to college and then I did a Disney college program, I met people that were amazing human beings. And that gave me that hope that not everyone's a jerk. Because growing up in New Jersey, like, although I had some friends and such that are supportive, but like the kind of vibe over there and the culture, they can be kind of like hostile and kind of like, oh yeah,
Crash.
you'll get over it, or Yeah. So yeah, so you get the whole like East Coast and New
Yeah.
Jersey, New York thing, but which is another reason why I moved out of there. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so you kind of like just realize that not everywhere is like that, and people are actually kind and supportive. So, but I'm also am very like lucky that my parents were supportive. Like once I got like caught the whole self-harming, they like took me straight to a psychiatrist. So, they are supportive in that. But yeah, there's people out there who don't have that. And I think in my life where if I didn't have the kind of family and friends in my life, I probably would be dead by now.
Yeah,
Like
I
how sad that sounds, but like with my condition, if I was untreated, then who knows? I could have overdosed by now. I could have jumped off a cliff. Like if
yeah.
I went down the route with no support, I swear I probably would be dead.
So do you feel like you're somebody now who, when you're feeling yourself maybe go into a darker place or struggling with something, that you're inclined to ask for help because like you've experienced people being there for you, so it feels safe to ask for support when you need it?
Yeah, I'm actually am confident in asking for help because, I've have experienced it and I've experienced like kind people around me, and I think just over the years, like just me doing my mental health advocacy and just doing everything what I do till today, it puts me in a position where I'm like extremely confident, and like my goal for this whole like podcast and mental health brand is to people to get to my position because I meet people who don't have that kind of confidence. And Mentally About Us also has an apparel line um, that has like certain designs where not many people would wear. So like one of the designs says, I may be smiling, but I'm dead inside. And that routes back to people who are experiencing like depression and such.
Yeah.
And I am one of those people where I'm like bubbly and smiling, but like a lot of the times I just like, I'm not, like I'm dead inside. And I grew up with people assumed that I was like happy. Like even when I was a child, like like literally my soul started dying when I was 9 years old. But yeah, no, but you kind of had to like keep up with the smiles. And then also when you're working for Disney, which probably wasn't great for my mental health, you obviously have to keep that smile on, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So there was a lot more pressure in that way. And that really messed up my mental health where I had to like go on FML and be on like meds all the time. It was a lot, but luckily I was able to, break free of that, which is interesting because Disney like kind of saved me, but also killed me at the same time.
I mean, I
So
had the sort of the
like
same experience with Amazon, like when
yeah,
I
yeah,
went
exactly.
through the abuse with my ex and losing my
Mhm.
mom, they were like I came back from my paid leave, but it was basically sort of with the sorry, I'm stumbling through that, but like so with the domestic violence issues and then with I can't remember bereavement. Sorry, I couldn't remember the word for it. When you lose somebody, I basically came back and they were like, "You're underperforming," and I'm like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, you understand the severity of the circumstances that
Yeah.
are happening right now." And I think it's really hard to feel like you're doing the best you can to just like wake up every day and make sure that you're functioning in some degree and to then be told like, hey, yeah, this isn't enough still. I mean, it's more than enough. Sometimes that is what you have the capacity for. Never mind the fact
Mhm.
that like up until the point where you took that leave, I imagine this is what it was for me, is there's a lot of stuff happening that led you to take that leave. So it's not like you go on this leave for a couple days, weeks, whatever, and now you come back and you're totally fine. It's a process that is ongoing that businesses like that just they don't respect. And I understand you need to keep the ball rolling, but at the to the detriment of the people who are running or basically making the business work for you.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna clarify my FMLA thing because you could take a leave and be away, but the way it's flexible is that I had 480 hours a year that I was allowed to call in or take
Mhm.
off where I wouldn't get, fired. So the way I used it was the days that I couldn't get out of bed, that's when I called in. And because when you're really stressed out and you're going through a lot, if you have a condition like what I have with bipolar, it flares like crazy.
Yeah.
So I was at one point where I was doing better, but then when I was stressed out, I have bipolar too, so that's mostly depression. My depression was so bad, I couldn't get out of bed till like 6 p.m. I even like had Cheez-Its at the side of my bed so I can make sure I eat something. Like
Yeah.
I always tell people, like I had emergency Cheez-Its by my bed. I
Yeah.
also was buying a lot of Uber Eats because I couldn't cook. Like That's when it was bad. I knew it was getting bad when I was calling once a week, then it was 2 times a week, then I was always late for work, I was leaving early, like, I would get so much anxiety if I had, like, a bad experience with a call with a guest, like, I start going into a spiral. I would go to my leader and be like, "I need to use FMLA, I gotta get out of here because or I'm gonna just, like, have a panic attack." So, like, that's when it came in handy.
Yeah.
But I the point when you said, like, you went and you go away and you come back, like, that didn't happen with me, but it did happen to actually my leader, but it was maternity leave.
Mhm.
So she just had a baby and she's a new mother. And then when she came back, obviously you're a completely different human being. They were expecting her to be exactly how she was before without having currently what's going on with being a new mother.
Yeah.
She talked about that on one of my episodes. But yeah, no, that totally makes sense, and that's really, I guess for me, I guess I kind of got lucky with it. I also had like a leader, the one that she actually got screwed over with. Like she was a great leader. Like
Yeah. I mean, it
she
makes a
like
difference.
yes, that's what I was gonna ask you. Like, do you think it was more of like your boss that was a jerk, or was it just like I guess like Amazon's like
Ama
standards that they were like they had to
Yeah.
talk to you like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I would
Like,
think it was Amazon's policy, because
oh,
basically, like,
okay.
they have sort of a standard quota of sort of performance things that they have to put out every so
Hmm.
often to kind of, like, keep I don't know, keep the bar
Keep the
wherever
ball
they
rolling.
want it to
Yeah.
be, yeah. So, yeah, so I mean, I think, like, at least listen, I'll be honest, I was probably not executing my best, but again, I think reasonably so. And it was just a matter of, like, who can you get rid of right now? So, I mean, I jumped ship
Hmm.
before it affected me there, but it just was really kinda lousy to feel like you're in such a complicated situation and there really wasn't empathy for that. It's less about,
Mm,
the individual person and more about sort of the practice within the business.
yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So right now, you're not working for Amazon. So what are you currently doing right now? I know you do the podcast,
Yeah,
but I'm
so
curious to know what else.
yeah, I mean, mostly the podcast, and then I'm kicking off a new project with my wife, Nicole, Healthy Love, which is gonna be our new show, and the goal there is to really help people create and nurture love in all areas of their life, so from self-love to romantic relationships and other interpersonal relationship dynamics, friendships, family, things like that, because of all the things that we've learned along the way. She's been an
Yeah.
absolute rock star human for me coming out of everything that I just described. I've joked around that I feel like when we lost my mom, she went wherever you go and was like, "I would like to speak to the manager and I need somebody to fix this." And really it really delivered. We have such a great partnership and something that coming out of that last relationship, really understanding my need for self-worth and then being with somebody who helps me really be the full expression of myself without judgment, who is fully supportive, who was there through all of the divorce, losing my mom, everything. We met very quickly and we were friends first. So we've evolved a lot together through very hard things. Wanting to be able to show people what's possible, not just, live in the story of what happened that was traumatic that led me to the growth, but also to exemplify the type of really positive outcomes that can happen when you find your people, whether that's romantically or friends or whatever, chosen family. And so we're really excited to be kicking that off. And then I'm also working part time with one of my friends at her PR company and trying to help people who are in, mindful and conscious businesses really elevate their brands and things like that, and leveraging my podcasting experience there to help create content and solidify messaging for people. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag these days, but it feels really good to not be under the thumb in a corporate environment like I had been for so long. I just knew from the get go that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And having some of this freedom is really liberating in a lot of ways and allowing me to access more creativity, which is also a really healing thing. I think that's part of it too, is just giving yourself space to try new things and see, what feels good, and doing more of what really feels good is just one of the best things ever. Sometimes you don't even know what's going to make you happy. So you just sort of start experimenting a little. And I have like a little bonus space in our house that it's been a million things, but now most recently is like my little painting studio. And I'm not like a painter. But I've been playing with abstract art and just sort of like, splashing paint on the canvases and seeing, what comes out of it, and just giving myself time to listen to music and free myself from the expectations of everything. Because I think when you're in your head so much, being in a work environment where it's just deliver, 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 you lose sight of some of those things that give you space to explore these parts of yourself that maybe need some attention.
Yeah, and when I was listening to you, I was like, you deserve all of that. Just like hearing your story, like what you went through, like first, the corporate job, the toxic ex, losing your mother, like that's a lot. That's a lot for like, a person to go through. And but then you were given like these opportunities of being able to have the freedom and actually do something that is fulfilling in your life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't have that. So I think what you're gonna do too with your new podcast is I'm super excited to like hear it. So you gotta let me know. Oh, I follow you on social, so I'm sure I'll see it. But then again, the algorithm kind of sucks, so we'll see. Uh,
Yeah. I'll do
but
a
I feel
I'll do
like
a
this is
blast so people know.
okay. So this is great because there's people, who are in these narcissistic relationships and they need to know how life is, getting out of that. They need
Yeah.
that hope because a lot of times people who are in these abusive relationships, they forget who they were before. They
Oh, yeah.
forget how life was before. They think this is how life's supposed to be. I feel like consciously they like, "Oh yeah, no, this sucks." Because people are telling them it's not supposed to be like that, but
Yeah.
they're so like deep into it, or they're like, no, like subconsciously they're like, I can't leave.
You forget what it feels like for your nervous system to be calm.
Yes,
And it's
that's
the
it.
best. Oh my God, it's the best. Feeling like safe and at peace in your body. It's just like, oh, you can breathe again. You're not like hyper vigilant constantly. And I just feel, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I really feel like when I started off sharing my story in other shows and on my own show, I was really expressing the what happened part of it and contextualizing the story. But I was on a show somewhat recently where I expressed sort of the aftermath, and in the low parts of the aftermath, but then also this really reinvigorated version of myself. And I feel like I just so badly want people to know how much better it can be. And it's like, if you're trying to
Yeah.
leave and you can't, like, I know circumstances can be different for everybody. I didn't have kids. That was helpful. I wasn't
Yeah.
reliant on my ex for finances. That was really important. But it's never going to get better with a narcissist. So at some point, you ultimately have to choose you. And the best advice that I can give to anybody who's feeling shame about not having left sooner, or somebody who wants to leave and hasn't yet but will, is something that one of my guests said to me, Christina Carlson, who had left an evangelical religious upbringing. So sort of similar in the sense of feeling trapped in a situation, said you left when you could. And it was like, it gave me the opportunity to just have, as you said earlier, some grace for myself, that the circumstances were what they were. And it wasn't that I didn't want to or didn't try to leave, but when you finally could, you did. And that's what matters. And just know that it's important to find yourself again. And in order to get out of that relationship, you have to dig into that a little bit before you're going to leave. It's just that my experience, at least, is that you got to start really pushing yourself into like why you're accepting what you're accepting. And if that's not what you want, what's your plan to get out of it and go live a better life? Because people are out there who are going to love you and treat you well. And it's amazing. It's amazing when you have that.
Yeah. And I think that summarized everything that you said and what I said about how, your experience with narcissism, and then my talking about like there are people out there that are going to love you, you just kind of have to really utilize also your resources, aka the internet
Yeah.
as well, or also just like old fashioned, like finding people in your area that I go to once a month. I go to this like networking creator event where I meet people who are creators as well, and it's so therapeutic. Let me
Yeah. I
tell
love
you.
that. It's a great idea.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do want to say thank you so much for taking your time to come on
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
podcast and telling your story. It takes a lot of like, courage to do that. And I was so into your story. So I hope my audience does as well. And also thank you for being with me during all these technical issues. It actually wasn't even. It was first a technical issue, then it was a fire alarm, then
Then it was dogs barking. It's
and it
just,
was dogs. But you got to keep pushing through, right? This
yeah,
conversation was meant to happen.
yeah, absolutely. Justine, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I love everything that you're doing with Mentally Badass, and I'm excited to just keep following along and see where your journey takes you.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. So everyone who's listening, thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.